Tonight, I want you to close your eyes and stand beside an oil well at midnight. Smell the stink of crude seeping up through wooden derricks. See the torch flames flicker across the mud, the shadows of rough men hauling barrels that will change the world. Now step away from the mud and into an office lit by a single gas lamp. A lean man, precise as a ledger, sits behind a desk. His eyes sharp, his hands neat, his mind already 20 moves ahead. His name was John Davison Rockefeller, the world's first billionaire, the dark prince of oil, the man who turned black sludge into an empire so vast it forced America to invent new laws just to break his crown. Some remember him as the original robber baron, ruthless, secretive, feared. Some remember him as a saint of philanthropy, the man who gave away more than any king before him. Tonight, we scrape away the oil and the gilded gold to find the boy who counted pennies in a dirt-poor Ohio farmhouse, the young clerk who smelled a fortune in black puddles, and the old man who outlived empires and himself. This is Faces of History. I'm the Duke of New York. And tonight, we drill deep with John D. Rockefeller. Long before barrels of oil, before Wall Street hissed his name like a curse, there was just a boy. A boy sitting at a wobbly table in Richford, New York, pencil in hand, head bowed over a dog-eared ledger. John Davison Rockefeller was born in 1839, the second child of William Avery Rockefeller and Eliza Davison. His mother was devout, tight-fisted, practical to the bone. His father, they called him Big Bill, a door-to-door pitchman, a small-time grifter who hawked miracle cures that cured nothing at all. While Big Bill roamed the countryside, charming farmers out of pennies with his bottle of rock oil, young John stayed behind with Eliza, a mother who drilled thrift and discipline into her boy deeper than any oil well ever drilled rock. In their clapboard farmhouse, money was more ghost than fact. A flicker here, a promise there, but never enough. Big Bill made it fast, spent it faster, and often didn't come home at all. When he did, he swaggered through the door with new excuses, new schemes, new debts. John watched. He watched his father lie. He watched his mother stretch a single dollar into a week of bread and candles. He learned early that the world was divided into two kinds of men, those who chase easy money and those who count the pennies one by one. So John counted. At age 7, he raised a few turkeys and sold them to neighbors for a neat profit. When other boys played marbles, John ran errands for a few cents. He lent small amounts to local farmers, always with interest, always recorded in his ledger. He called interest working while I sleep. Even then, he knew money should never be idle. Eliza made him attend church every Sunday. She read the Bible aloud at the table, verses about thrift, hard work, righteous gain. In the cold nights when the oil lamp flickered low, John studied his sums by its sputtering flame. There were no silk sheets in that house, no golden spoons, just rough blankets, dry bread, and an iron certainty that God helps those who help themselves and punishes waste above all sins. Young John prayed for strength and for a chance. By 16, the family moved to Cleveland, Ohio, a raw, booming town perched on the edge of Lake Erie. There, the boy who counted pennies stepped into a world that needed men like him, steady, precise, relentless. The land was wild. Fortunes were waiting, but only if your books balanced and your handshake meant something. John got his first real job at 16, an assistant bookkeeper for a produce company, $6 a week. He arrived early, stayed late, tallied every invoice twice, then once more for luck. The owner trusted him with more work, more responsibility. By the time he turned 20, Rockefeller wasn't just keeping books. He was writing his own. In a world of gamblers, John D. Rockefeller was a clerk, but a clerk who understood the quiet power of the ledger. He believed that pennies turned into dimes, dimes into dollars, dollars into empires, but only for the man who knew where every cent came from and where it was going next. So while the world bragged and boasted, young Rockefeller sat in the corner, head bent over columns of neat black ink, building, slowly, steadily, the mind of a man who would one day teach America how to squeeze a penny until it begged for mercy. Remember this image, a boy in a cold farmhouse, a single coin clutched in his small hand, turning it over in the candlelight. Because that coin was more than a coin. It was a seed. And John D. Rockefeller was ready to plant it, deep in the oil fields that would change the world forever. Picture this: Cleveland, Ohio, 1855. A raw young city, brick streets lined with wagons, lake winds carrying the sharp tang of iron ore, grain dust, pig fat, the raw breath of America on the cusp of becoming something bigger than itself. At 16, John D. Rockefeller steps into this world not with a shout, but with a ledger. He lands a job at Hewitt and Tuttle, a small produce and commission house. $6 a week, enough to help keep food on his mother's table, enough to keep the family clear of Big Bill's debts. He is no golden boy, no genius inventor, no charismatic orator. Rockefeller's power is quieter, an iron focus, a brain like a steel trap for numbers, a discipline that makes him old before his time. Where others skim receipts, John double-checks them. He memorizes freight rates. He calculates profit margins for barrels of pork, bushels of wheat, kegs of whiskey, the lifeblood of an expanding city. He works 12, 14 hours a day, never late, never wasteful, never careless. A dime out of place in the books is an insult to God's order, and John D. Rockefeller does not insult order. By 19, he's ready to bet on himself. He asks for a raise, and when his bosses balk, he leaves. He borrows $1,000, a terrifying sum for a poor clerk from his father's old creditor. With that loan, he partners with Maurice B. Clark, a brash Englishman who knows the trade game. Together they form Clark and Rockefeller, a commission merchant firm. They buy produce from Midwest farmers. They sell it to the armies of the Union and to hungry cities back east. It's 1861. War is good for business. The Union needs food, goods, gunpowder, metal, and Clark and Rockefeller supply it. John handles the books. Maurice courts the clients. It works for a while. But John D. Rockefeller hates waste. He hates confusion. He hates the slapdash chaos of his partner's freewheeling ways. He wants precision, predictability, total control. He wants business to be a machine, not a gamble. So when the Clark brothers squabble over money, Rockefeller waits. Quietly, patiently, he buys them out in a silent auction, a trick that will become his signature move for the next half-century. One by one, the wild cards are swept from the deck. By 1865, Rockefeller stands alone at the head of a grain and produce firm. No longer just a clerk, but a young boss with cash flow, credit lines, and a hunger for more. And just as he finds his footing, the next opportunity comes bubbling up from the mud. In western Pennsylvania, a man named Edwin Drake drills America's first oil well in Titusville. And suddenly, the black goo that used to ruin farmland is now the hottest ticket in the Republic. Men rush to drill wells. Wildcatters, speculators, gamblers. They hit oil today, go broke tomorrow. Fortunes are made and lost overnight. But Rockefeller sees something the wildcatters don't. Oil is useless in the ground. It has to be refined, cleaned, treated, barreled, shipped, and the real fortune will belong to the man who does that better, cheaper, and bigger than anyone else. In 1863, Rockefeller buys into a small refinery run by Samuel Andrews, a chemist with the know-how to turn crude into kerosene, the new miracle fuel for lamps that keeps America awake after sunset. John brings order to the chaos, negotiating with railroads for cheaper freight rates, buying barrels in bulk, cutting waste to the bone. Where others guess, he calculates. Where others brag, he plans. The once timid clerk has become the boss, the young master of a new American gold rush. By the time he's 30, John D. Rockefeller isn't chasing fortune in muddy oil fields. He's turning oil into an empire from a tidy Cleveland office, pens scratching across ledgers that always balance to the last penny. So remember this: before the railroads bent to his will, before Standard Oil swallowed rivals whole, before Congress tried to break him apart, John D. Rockefeller was just a boy who knew that in America's raw new century, the man who controls the books controls the future. It's the late 1860s, and America's oil fever is burning hotter than any torch flame in a Cleveland refinery yard. Wells are striking black gold in Titusville, Oil City, and beyond. Men with muddy boots and pockets full of wild dreams are striking it rich and losing it all just as fast. Most see oil as a gamble. Rockefeller sees oil as destiny, but only if it can be tamed, organized, refined, controlled. In 1865, Rockefeller buys out his last partner, and with Samuel Andrews, the chemist, he takes full command. They build bigger stills, bigger storage tanks, better shipping routes. While others brag about how much oil they've struck, Rockefeller brags about how much he can refine, cleaner, cheaper, steadier than any competitor. But Rockefeller's real genius isn't just chemistry, it's integration. He looks at the oil trade and sees chaos, hundreds of tiny refineries, each wasting money on barrels, storage, rail fees. So he decides to squeeze out the waste and everyone who gets in the way. In 1870, he does what only a true predator of capitalism would dare. He creates a new company, Standard Oil. The name itself is a promise, oil refined to a standard so pure, so reliable, that no one else's kerosene can compete. Standard Oil doesn't strike oil, it swallows it. It builds bigger refineries, cuts secret deals with the railroads for preferential shipping rates, and slashes prices so low that competitors either sell out or starve. By 1872, Rockefeller and his trusted lieutenants form the South Improvement Company, a shadowy alliance to fix shipping rates with major rail lines. Rivals scream foul. Newspapers call it a conspiracy. Wildcatters protest in the streets of Oil City, setting fire to barrels and effigies. Rockefeller shrugs. He's not in the oil business to play fair. He's in it to win. And when they push back, he buys them out, or undercuts them so brutally they crawl to him for mercy. One by one, tiny independents fold into Standard Oil, the beast that grows not by drilling new wells, but by owning every step. The wells, the pipelines, the barrels, the tank cars, the storage tanks, the refineries, the retail wagons, even the byproducts like paraffin and chewing gum. Oil is not a product anymore, it's a monopoly. By the 1880s, Standard Oil controls 90% of America's refining capacity. 9 out of every 10 lamps that burn kerosene at night owe their light to Rockefeller's empire. Even as the country explodes westward, building railroads, paving streets, wiring telegraphs, Rockefeller's pipelines snake quietly underground, carrying crude cheaper than any rail car could haul. But success plants the seeds of backlash. Journalists call him the octopus, arms wrapping around every barrel, every rail line, every pocket of power. Competitors call him a robber baron, a bloodless pirate of the boardroom. Preachers call him a necessary evil, a sober Baptist who prays on Sunday and prays on Monday. Rockefeller, meanwhile, sits in his Cleveland office, ledger open, bills balanced, dividends paid. He rarely grants interviews. He rarely smiles for the camera. He doesn't need to. His empire speaks louder than any speech he might give. And here's the paradox. The man who counted pennies in a farmhouse now counts millions in dividends. But to him, it's still the same math. Cut waste, kill inefficiency, control the flow, own the outcome. He reinvests every dollar back into Standard Oil. He builds trust agreements, secret structures that bind the company's far-flung parts into one unstoppable organism. He places loyal men at every rung of the ladder, the original corporate culture drilled into everyone from the refinery floor to the executive suite. But America begins to stir. Farmers hate the monopoly. Politicians fear the power. Journalists like Ida Tarbell sharpen their pens and sink them into Standard's hide, telling the public about the secret rebates, the railroad deals, the corporate chokehold on free enterprise. By 1890, Congress passes the Sherman Antitrust Act, the first shot fired at the oil giant's heart. But Rockefeller is already 3 moves ahead. The man who built Standard Oil knows it's too big, too entangled, too essential to break with a single law. It will take decades, armies of lawyers, thousands of pages of testimony to pull its pieces apart. And by then, the fortune will already be safe. He didn't just build an oil company. He built a fortress of capital that no trustbuster could breach overnight. So next time you flick on a lamp, fill a tank, or pass a gas station, remember the clerk turned titan who showed America how to build an empire so tight, so efficient, so merciless that it forced the government itself to invent new rules just to catch up. By the time the century turned, John D. Rockefeller was no longer just a businessman. He was a living symbol. To some, a symbol of progress, cheap oil that lit homes, fueled engines, greased the gears of an industrial nation. To others, he was the dark heart of monopoly, the octopus king, squeezing the life out of every free trader, every mom-and-pop refinery that dared to stand in his shadow. America needed heroes and villains, and John D. Rockefeller made for both. Journalists found their angle in muck and ink. The boldest among them was Ida Tarbell, the daughter of an independent oilman crushed under Standard Oil's boot. In the first years of the 1900s, she published her serialized expose in McClure's magazine, The History of the Standard Oil Company, line by line, chapter by chapter, tearing open Rockefeller's secret deals, backroom bargains, and brutal tactics. She called him the money octopus, a creature that strangled competition, coiled around railroads, pipelines, banks, and the very lifeblood of free markets. While Tarbell's words rattled drawing rooms, Congress and the courts got busy. The Sherman Antitrust Act had been written in 1890, but now in the new century, America finally decided to use it. State by state, lawsuit by lawsuit, the U.S. government pointed its finger at Standard Oil. Trust busting had a new poster child, and that child looked like an old man in a neat black suit flicking through dividend sheets by lamplight. But here's the twist. Rockefeller didn't flinch. While headlines screamed, "Break up the octopus," Rockefeller was already slipping into the shadows. By the 1890s, he'd stepped back from daily control, leaving the details to lieutenants like Henry Flagler and John Archbold. The master of the ledger knew when to exit the counting house. He let the lawyers and politicians wrestle with the giant he'd built, while he turned his eyes to something bigger than oil. In these years, Rockefeller transformed from robber baron to philanthropist. He gave millions, then tens of millions, then hundreds of millions away to medicine, science, education. He built the University of Chicago almost single-handedly. He funded cures for diseases that crippled the American South. He established foundations that would one day pioneer vaccines, eradicate hookworm, modernize medical schools. He called it his duty, the gospel of wealth put into practice. Wealth, he believed, was God's trust in his hands, but keeping it locked up was a sin. The rich man's job was to multiply the good his money could do, after multiplying the money itself by any means necessary. While the newspapers howled, Rockefeller retreated to Forest Hill, his Cleveland mansion, then to the lush acres of Pocantico Hills in New York. There he strolled the gardens, played golf religiously, clipped wildflowers for his wife, Seti, the same woman who'd kept his house humble even as his fortune soared into the clouds. He lived simply, at least by the standards of kings. He clipped coupons, literally, from his bonds every month. He knew the yield of every investment, the status of every trust, the worth of every acre of oil land. Even in semi-retirement, the tycoon's mind never stopped turning. In 1911, the Supreme Court finally did what muckrakers and Congress had only dreamed of. It ruled that Standard Oil was a monopoly and ordered it broken apart. But here's the twist. Rockefeller's final trick. By then, he owned so many shares in the baby companies, Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, Amoco, that the breakup only made him richer. Standard Oil's pieces turned into giants themselves, each paying dividends to the man who'd built the whole monstrous puzzle in the first place. Rockefeller once said, "Competition is a sin." He didn't mean he hated business. He meant he hated waste, chaos, duplication. He believed that only one man at the helm with one vision and one plan could make an industry run like a perfect clock. But America would not be run like a Rockefeller ledger forever. Sooner or later, the country that worshipped free enterprise had to fight the man who showed what it really looked like when you won the game. So the tycoon became the target. The target became a legend. The legend became the nation's first billionaire. And while others cursed his name in the oil fields, Rockefeller's dollars flowed into libraries, laboratories, black colleges, and schools for poor children who'd never know the iron grip that squeezed those dollars into being. Next time you see a gas pump, a grand old college hall, a dusty biology lab with a plaque that says Rockefeller funded, remember this: you are looking at both sides of the coin, the tycoon and the target, the strangler and the benefactor, the octopus king and the Sunday school Baptist who never missed a sermon. When John D. Rockefeller stepped away from his empire's beating heart, he didn't vanish into the shadows of oil wells and broken trusts. He turned the same relentless gaze that built Standard Oil inward and then outward toward a new mission, to give away what he'd spent a lifetime piling up. It sounds simple, doesn't it? A rich man giving back. But for Rockefeller, giving was never charity tossed like crumbs to the hungry. It was an extension of the same ruthless logic that refined oil cheaper, shipped it faster, priced it better than anyone else. Efficiency, order, return on investment, not in dollars this time, but in human lives transformed. In the late 1800s, even before the Supreme Court trust-busting hammer fell, Rockefeller began carving pieces from his fortune for public good. It started with churches and Baptist missions, the faith his mother Eliza had etched deep into his bones back when he was a boy counting pennies in Richford. He gave to the Northern Baptists, Sunday schools, mission boards, orphan homes. But this was just the prologue. The real revolution came when Rockefeller looked at a map of America and saw black spots, places where knowledge had never spread, places where poverty clung to generations like soot to an oil barrel. So he started with education. In 1889, he founded the University of Chicago, not an old ivy-spired in colonial stone, but a new giant on the prairie, a place where modern research would thrive, where students could come from poor farms or city slums and sit side by side with sons of bankers. He poured millions into it, again and again. The University of Chicago would grow into a colossus of research, churning out scientists, doctors, economists, and future leaders who'd never touch an oil barrel, but who would carry the Rockefeller name far beyond refineries and railroad deals. Then came medicine. At the turn of the century, America's hospitals were grim places. Science was patchwork. Diseases like hookworm, yellow fever, and malaria devoured whole communities in the South. Rockefeller saw an opportunity, not just to ease suffering, but to cure it at its root. He launched the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research in 1901, America's first great biomedical lab, modeled on Europe's best. It would evolve into Rockefeller University, a temple where Nobel Prizes would grow like steel rails once did under Standard Oil. Then came the Rockefeller Sanitary Commission, a name that sounds dull until you realize it helped wipe out hookworm in the American South. Hookworm, the germ of laziness they called it then, drained whole generations of children. Barefoot farm kids who couldn't stand straight, who couldn't work fields, who stayed poor because parasites drained them dry. Rockefeller's dollars sent doctors into backwoods cabins, taught families about hygiene, funded treatments that turned despair into health and productivity. The same obsession with cleanliness that scrubbed kerosene until it burned pure now burned disease from the American bloodstream. He gave to black colleges, Spelman College in Atlanta, named for his wife's abolitionist family. He funded black medical schools when no one else would. His money flowed into libraries, colleges, scientific surveys, global health missions. But this was no scattershot charity. Rockefeller wanted a machine for giving, a Standard Oil of philanthropy. So in 1913, he created the Rockefeller Foundation, an engine designed to run forever, run efficiently, run wisely. By his death, it had funded thousands of projects, from eradicating malaria in the South Pacific to training doctors in China to jump-starting the fledgling field of public health worldwide. In private, Rockefeller said that making money was easy. The ability to deal with people is as purchasable a commodity as sugar or coffee, he once boasted. But giving it away wisely, that was the harder test. He told his children and the world that wealth was a stewardship, not a trophy. He wanted to shape future generations of givers, men and women who'd measure every dollar's impact the way he once measured every drop of oil that flowed through his pipes. Of course, he never shook the shadow of Standard Oil's ruthless birth. Some called him a saint in old age. Others called him a cunning publicist, washing his sins with tax-exempt millions. Maybe both are true. Maybe that's what makes him so American, the paradox of the tycoon turned benefactor. The iron-fisted king who believed the dollar could save the same people it once squeezed. So next time you pass under a library's arch, next time you read a medical breakthrough from a lab in New York, or step onto a college campus carved out of prairie mud, remember the old man with his ledgers, his clipped coupons, his church hymns sung softly in the twilight. In the next breath, we'll walk with Rockefeller down the final stretch of his life, the quiet gardens, the farewell notes, the last billion-dollar smile of the world's first oil king turned philosopher of wealth. If you want to see the real John D. Rockefeller in his final days, don't look for him in the skyscrapers that rose because of his oil. Don't look for him in the boardrooms where lawyers carved Standard Oil into baby giants. Don't look for him in courtrooms packed with trustbusters or the front pages that once called him the octopus. Look for him on the wide porches of his grand estate at Pocantico Hills, in the gardens that rolled green and peaceful above the Hudson River, where the world's first billionaire liked nothing better than to stroll at dawn, hat in hand, counting rose petals instead of pennies. In his last decades, John D. Rockefeller shrank from the public's rage and worship alike. The old ledger books were gone, his empire now divided by law into Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, Amoco, each one feeding him dividends like obedient sons. He didn't need to lift a finger. His fortune rolled on, interest upon interest, profit upon profit. A Niagara Falls of money, pouring quietly into trusts, foundations, family legacies. He became something rare for a man who once frightened senators, approachable. Reporters who caught him in those final years found not the cold-eyed tycoon of Tarbell's pages, but a bony old man, dressed simple, polite to a fault. A man who passed out dimes to children, a superstition of his, a token gesture that puzzled some and charmed others. If you met John D. Rockefeller on a golf course or outside church, odds were he'd press a shiny new dime into your palm. "Save it," he'd say with that tight little grin, "and it'll grow." And oh, how he loved to measure things still. He counted calories, ate sparingly, drank milk by the glass, kept to his walking and golf. His personal doctor said he might have lived to 120 if nature would only oblige. In truth, Rockefeller was outliving more than just men. He was outliving an age. By the time the 1930s dawned, the world that oil built was changing again. Cars clogged city streets, highways cut across states where once only Rockefeller's pipelines ran. Electricity replaced kerosene lamps. New tycoons, Henry Ford, J.P. Morgan's successors, rose up to lay fresh rails across the American century. And still, in his big quiet house, the old man woke early, read his Bible, dictated short letters, clipped coupons, literally, from the endless stream of bonds that kept his coffers full. He was a billionaire when that word was a myth. He died still the richest private citizen America had ever known. But if you asked him about the fortune, he'd tell you it was never really about the dollars. It was about order. Control, God's blessing. He once said he believed he was chosen, that the same divine hand that guided his mother's hymn singing in that tiny farmhouse guided him when he made or broke an oil deal. Some called it arrogance. Some called it faith. Maybe both were right. In May 1937, at nearly 98 years old, the man who'd wrestled an industry into his ledger finally let go. Pneumonia, the old reaper of the elderly, did what trustbusters, congressmen, and railroad barons never could. It stopped the Octopus King for good. He died in his sleep at the Casements, his winter home in Ormond Beach, Florida, surrounded not by lawyers and rivals, but by family, loyal secretaries, and quiet prayers whispered at his bedside. They laid him to rest in Lakeview Cemetery in Cleveland, the city where his empire first dripped from battered wooden barrels into the hungry fires of his refineries. No great mausoleum, no monument as grand as his bank accounts. Just a stone with his name, John Davison Rockefeller, the boy who counted pennies, the clerk who smelled profit in puddles of black sludge, the titan who shaped the oil age and forced a nation to invent new rules just to contain him. His wealth didn't vanish when he did. It kept flowing, seed money for the modern world. The Rockefeller Foundation, the University of Chicago, the medical breakthroughs, the public health revolutions, the libraries that opened dusty minds, all of them traces of the iron-fisted Baptist who prayed loud and squeezed harder. So next time you see the sparkle of gas under neon lights, or open a library door in a forgotten corner of a small town, or read about a cure that started with a Rockefeller grant, remember this: the final sunset for the man did not mean a sunset for his empire. His dollars live on. His legend too, half robber baron, half reluctant savior. Faces like Rockefeller's remind us that power once forged never really dies. It just changes hands, changes shape, changes the world in ways even the man who built it could never fully control. So next time you flick on a light or drive a road paved in oil, think of the boy who counted pennies while his father sold snake oil. Think of the man who squeezed an empire out of black sludge, then tried to scrub his name clean with schools and vaccines. Faces like Rockefeller's remind us that wealth is never simple. It can crush, it can lift, and sometimes it does both in the same breath. If you learned something tonight, share this story. Subscribe, leave a review. And tell your friends that Faces of History doesn't just teach, it drills deep, it burns bright, and it leaves a light on for the next mind hungry enough to change the world. I'm the Duke of New York. Stay curious, stay brave, and remember, sometimes the oil that fuels tomorrow is just an idea, waiting for someone ruthless enough to strike it.